The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Here I was thinking that was a less glitchy version of Born to Be Alive, and I've affected the airwaves yet again. You're listening to Rosie Pekar on Until Now on W4CY Radio. For those that want to join the live chat, go ahead to w4cy.com and click on the Join the Conversation on the right-hand side and get ready to ask your questions, because today's guest, we have a psychic from Australia in a beautiful part of Australia called Montville. So for those American listeners, if you get to Australia, it's a must-see. It's one of our most beautiful, pristine areas that we have here within Australia. And our guest is not only a professional psychic, but also has quite a lot of extraordinary experiences that he's going to be sharing today. So I'd like to welcome, joining us here, Paul Boulton.
Hi, Rosie. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here. And very exciting morning to be on the radio.
Exactly. Now, my listeners will know that I come from a background of 16 years in investigations and in law enforcement as a police officer. But for yourself, just quickly, a little bit of your background that got you interested in becoming a professional psychic, because that's sort of not the job kit handed out to kids in high school.
Oh, absolutely not. And we have a big similarity there too, Rosie. My father was a Virgo and police inspector. So, boy, oh boy, was it not really sanctioned or thought to be of anything of use in any category in his definitions. So it was really a very difficult choice. And but, it's one of those things where it's you can only really do, well, for me anyway, I could only really do and be who I was. And to do that, I had a whole range of part-time jobs along the way as I was training myself in the 80s to move into being a professional psychic full-time since 2000, roughly. So,
okay, just as you're going to tell us how you came into becoming a professional psychic, just a couple of questions that I want to answer that we've got, whether we'll be taking questions tonight. You can certainly put your questions down. We'll certainly see how we go with time, because we want to make sure that we can enlighten and empower as many as possible through the sharing of ordinary people talking about their extraordinary experiences. And some of the other questions is, do you help the cops solve crimes, and did your father support your gift? So we'll incorporate that in your answer of how you evolved into becoming, an ordinary person growing up to choose a career as a professional psychic.
Yeah, well, in short, no, my father had no interest in what I did, and he actually said to me when I was about 25 that he puts people like me in jail, so no support coming out of the scenario. One of the best things in Queensland we had was the Premier Wayne Goss back in pre-1990, and he decriminalised vagrancy law, which was the big thing at the time, that psychics and fortune tellers could be come under the Vagrancy Act, and quite literally people would end up in court every couple of months and have to pay fines, and then try and incorporate that into their life, and getting verbaled in courts with various things that they allegedly said. And a friend of mine, a Hungarian psychic, probably the best crystal ball reader I've ever met in the mid-'80s, Louis Olar, his name was. He apparently was said in court that he told policewoman undercover that, she wasn't going to ever have children. And anyway, so everybody got up in arms about that, and he got fined and all that sort of stuff. And it was quite disturbing back in those days to see that sort of pressure and that. And happily, it's different now.
And there is actually a positive flip side to that, because one of my girlfriends, Janet Zaradnik, who has actually been proven in district court to be a genuine clairvoyant and psychic, because she was charged under the Act over in Perth about 30 odd years ago. The good part of that was she got such advertising through the media that it paid for her first house, because a lot of people wanted to come and see her, because, well, it wasn't lucky, it's that she was authentic. And that was the reality of it. She was able to, it didn't matter if one person says, like, let's face it, anyone can hang up a shingle and call themselves psychic. It's, they're trying to authenticate it these days with, psychic schools and different forms of training and education and information, because you are dealing with people often at vulnerable states and traumatic states. Absolutely. And it can be like good friends. Good friends can have the best intention to be helpful, however, can be incredibly harmful in the information and ill-gotten advice that they've given, depending on their life experience, their skill set. There's many factors that come into it that influence a person's ability to be a positive influence or a negative influence. So in her aspect, she was authentic, she was valid, she was credible, and that word of mouth spread. And that's, I think, how many other psychics today have developed their skill set.
Yeah, it's all about really life experience, and I don't think my general view for people these days, if you're breathing, you've got issues, and if you're, they're in there swirling around at different depths, just depending upon how busy the mind can be and how the survival focus is showing up in a person's reality.
So for yourself, growing up in an environment where you weren't supported and encouraged in a skill that you'd already, I'm going to assume, have identified that you have at that age?
From birth, really.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was growing up in a family where, opinion was law, and even if it was wrong opinion, it was law. And backchat wasn't welcomed in the 60s, early 60s growing up, and or a different opinion. So, I would watch my parents say and work through different topics, but I could feel what they were doing. I'm an empath, so I could feel what they were doing and how disturbed that some of those decisions brought themselves in terms of not feeling safe or heard or respected or appreciated, and how that played out in the family dynamic.
And I think that still goes on today in many environments across the globe. They're born in the cultures and environments where, the word or the law of the house is, the individual who sets themselves up as that law or that authority in the house. Whether it's valid
scary,
or
isn't
invalid.
It? Absolutely. It's usually the scariest, noisiest one.
I've stepped into a lot of those environments and been called in via, triple O over here, but it would be 911 in the US. So we all know people or have lived next to people like that. So for yourself, you identified it fairly early, and it showed up in the sense that as an empath that you can feel what's going on with other people irrespective of what they say.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm taking that as your definition of empath, or is it an expanded definition upon that?
Look, it's not only can I feel where they're at, but I can feel their journey in many cases, and so people will understand that many of the festivals these days are called body, mind, spirit festivals, but I actually support the healthy inclusion of the emotional aspect as its own high level beautiful quality, because if we're only droids, then body, mind, spirit will cover most categories, but the quality of life is in the healthy flow of our emotional reality, and that's where I target most of my work, in helping people feel safe again and then reconnect with their beautiful feelings of love and able to respond beautifully. And to do that, we've got to go through some murky areas of their past and history. But that's why I do the processing side of things.
Okay, and I'll just clarify for listeners, that's your identification of how that is resolved. It's not because, again, there are many modalities being presented on the globe at the moment. So therefore, I avoid or steer clear of language that says we have to. There are many options and many choices available to people. Mm-hmm. And that so far, I guess, is what you've identified as what works successfully and well within the practices that you pursue. Exactly,
Rosie. Look, one of the important attributes that I have as an empath is finding the dictionary the person's mind's using. And I know you're very clear, as you've already expressed there, on accurate definition. And so once I can tap into that library that the person's using and their dictionary in terms of reference, then I can steer my way through to help them get to a more courageous, more beautiful place, and help them with direction frequently as well. So that's my goal.
That's a really important clarity and distinction that you've highlighted for listeners at the moment, is that the language that we use often belies what's going on inside of ourselves. It may not really or truly reflect our reality. Like, I had a girlfriend text me only in the last week, and she texted an ungodly hour. When I've got a young child, it's like not going to happen that I'm not going to answer, and I don't buy into dramas. So she sent me this message about drama, and then written in there that it showed up as the devil itself. And so I answered her the next morning, and I said, OMG, oh my God, if you dial down the drama and amp up the appreciation and take it off outside of yourself and bring it back to source, yourself at cause, your language you're using. I said, you who has experienced so little of the world, she's in her mid-20s and she hasn't travelled outside of this location of Australia, and very little to do with other cultures and other life experiences. She hasn't had children. She hasn't experienced deaths of loved ones. You know, there's lots that she has yet to experience in the world, yet as now saying this one experience she had is the devil showing up on a doorstep. And I thought, my God, you've gone to such an extreme instantly as your first choice. And I thought, if you dialed down that drama to start with and looked at, okay, what is it to do with me that's going on, and amped up your appreciation, that you're aware, that you're intelligent, you've got a thinking apparatus and a feeling apparatus, and you can combine the two together to discern what's going on, you might feel a bit more powerful instead of powerless. Do you?
Yeah. Yeah. Look at that.
My question
girl.
I was going to put to you is, do you find most people come in at that high end of drama? Of
Not
whatever
really, no.
Oh, okay.
Not really, no. See, there's that girl in particular, she's building her own personal library based on her own definitions. So at 20, indeed, she's not going to have the library of a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old. She might never have the ability to articulate what she feels. What I find with people is if you or I met them on the footpath and said, how you going, they would frequently I'll get the answer, I'm fine. When they sit in my shop with me and one-to-one, when I ask them how they're going, because their mind feels in that moment that it's not necessarily in control of that conversation, then it can get quite quiet, it can get quite defensive, because the requirement of the individual in having a reading ultimately is to allow themselves to be vulnerable, to allow themselves to be accessed energetically and not to be exploited. But the problem with, from my view, with many of what our mind does, it builds a fortress from the early days to help it survive. And in many cases, I think our mind's primary focus is physical and mental survival as category 1 priority. And then other things after that. So to help a person out of deep fear or deep trauma or vulnerability or hurt, or, wherever they come in, they might be just shopping in the beautiful town of Montville that I live in, or I've got a Brisbane base as well. They could be just shopping, but the important aspects of the individual will quickly surface because, I think we're souls having a human experience in our mission statements to get everything looked at and into balance and evolve to become higher beings in our lifetime. So that's kind of how I see things.
Yep. One of the questions I've been asked is, does it ever get complicated with the feeling thing? And I would tend to think that it would actually compound and confuse some of the messages that are received via the mind and the body.
Well, maybe to someone using a mental dictionary, but what I work on is connecting with a person's emotional dictionary. So a mental dictionary will hold their thoughts, opinions, their views, their goals, their motivations, and all that sort of stuff. The emotional dictionary and storehouse of feelings will have their joys, their excitement, but also where they've been hurt in their life, or they got scared in their life, or they got traumatized, or they got sexually abused, or they got violated, or they got whatever they got will be in the emotional section of their specific library. Now, the mind, with its goal on surviving, will be doing everything it can to keep those sort of topics suppressed and trying to get them to work it out through action and positive focus and that. But sometimes those topics are really enormous, and it's just not that easy for them to manage that. And that's the beautiful part about how I can help a person.
Yes, it's one thing I've actually specialised in myself with trauma therapy. I've been in Aceh after the tsunami disaster that killed almost 200,000 people, and we provided a technique there that was an instantaneous technique that worked to put people just back into the present, because we do tend to relive these traumatic, difficult, challenging incidents exactly and impeccably as they were stored, and then tend to amplify it with that energy of emotion and attention that then recreates it again and again until it hits us on a cellular basis, and it does become physical, and it does become very real and active on an everyday state. So if someone's got this going on, an experience that has been traumatic, challenging, difficult, or grieving, do you have a 1, 2, 3, step process that you can lead people to help them empower themselves? Like, I'm all about always giving skills to an individual that they walk away with and no longer need me. If I'm needed, I'm not being authentic.
Yeah, look, in a process, if they have a reading with me, they always leave with homework. And the homework is basically designed to get them to put the names of the biggest hurts, if it's aimed at a person, the names of that person, usually their own parents and family, because lots of our challenges come in our own childhood, 0 to 10. And it's not necessarily bad parents. It's more of a case of us feeling vulnerable as children and not knowing what range of options we've got to respond. But it can still suppress a child's ability to speak up and feel safe. So basically what the statement does, which is a detachment statement, it basically energetically says, I want the highest and the best for that person and those people, despite what's happened in that encounter, because I want that for me. And so that simple little statement that they can repeat daily 10 times a day allows them to just start to defuse and quieten down the drama that the head wants to keep cranking things up with. And so,
okay, I'm just going to interrupt there and say, what if they can't go to that statement? Because as you said, not all parents are bad parents. However, I'm being the devil's advocate here because I've come from that background where I have seen some individuals that should never be permitted to even continue to breathe oxygen for the vile acts that they do to human beings. So
I worked on a lot of those people.
So they're not going to be able to think wanting the best for a person who has, gone out of their way to demonstrate not wanting the best for them. So have you got a step before that first step, like to fill in that gap?
That's the last thing that happens in the reading process. So the first thing I do is palmistry. I've been skilled in palmistry, been doing that for decades. They have a reading with me. The reading will show me how they've lived and loved, and it'll show them how they're lived and loved and how they're currently expressing themselves. So their mind and most people, let me just take out most there. Many people will show up as successes in the current definition, which means they might have a good enough paying job and be able to be paying off a house and have a nice car and be healthy enough in their body. Now, under standard social definitions, they're a success as a person. They're not necessarily, the most richest person in Australia, but they're functioning. In the areas of emotional health and effective processing of wound in their story and old hurts in their story, they could be completely on medication or in denial of lots of things that have happened to them, and that's the areas I help reduce the impacts from. So when it comes down to having a reading, the reading will show in real time what's going on for them. So the head could go, I'm fine, I'm good, it's great. But the cards can reflect that, look at this, you've got all this mental stress and you've got this deceit over here in this scenario, and you're feeling defensive and hurt in relation to this part of your life at the moment. And they'll go, oh, yes, that's my auntie, that's my brother, that's this or that's that. So basically we're building a personal interaction of a chord here, and then that's worked on into a few more spreads. So at the end of half an hour, they've got a new degree of clarity about how to best proceed in their reality, looking at probable outcomes. In any scenario, a person can just go, no, I'm not going to do anything, and that's my policy. And some of these things might not change as quickly as if they actioned positive change. But, at the end of the day, it's up to the individual and how they feel about the topic. So, in some cases, they're just not going to be ready to forgive. That happens every now and again. But most of the time, people are very open to have a statement that works.
Okay, now I'm going to ask a question that we don't know what we don't know. However, there are many experts out there, and I've spoken to many of them around the globe and that's where I become very distinct on the language that I choose to use, because I want to filter communication down to more or less its bare bones, so miscommunication is minimized as much as possible. And many of these experts seem to think that they have all the answers, which is actually I'd almost say a pet hate, but that's too strong a word. It's a pet dislike, because we don't know what we don't know, and we're continually expanding and developing and absorbing more and entertaining more and assimilating more. It's an ongoing evolution in a sense. So how, for those that are going to see a psychic or a professional psychic, because in the US, it's on every shop corner. I don't know whether you've been to the US or not, but it's on every shop corner. There's a shingle for a clairvoyant, a psychic. There's ones that, pay me $300 and I remove this curse from Uncle Grandma that, was why you haven't had a partner stay for longer than 6 months. All this, what I call codswallop. And again, I call it codswallop because people are, it's the old day of snake oil in a bottle, and it's a cure-all for everything. There are those that are just willing to take people's money. It's the same as the guys online that are pretending to be in love with you, and they've just met you 30 seconds ago, and send me your account detail. It's prevalent everywhere. And the field of psychics is a hotbed field of it. Now, I'm surrounded by people who are phenomenally gifted and talented. So I'm aware that there is a high level of expertise within this, qualified group. However, I've gone through the mill with many others, and I've sat many other. I remember sitting opposite one lady who patted me on the knee. And at the time I was a police officer, and she was sitting there so uncomfortable in her outfit she was wearing and had run late and stank of cigarette smoke. And she's tapping me on the knee and she's saying, honey, you need to learn to speak up a little bit more for yourself.
Really? My God.
And I thought, honey, I'd have you faced out in the bitumen in a heartbeat if I needed to. I'm the last person that needs to learn to speak up more.
I would doubt if that's possible, Rosie, just meeting you after a few minutes.
I know, but that's what I kept a poker face, and I stifled the smirk that was building up. And I thought she was reading herself more than she was reading me. Now, I'm highly intuitive as well, so I was able to discern this, and I didn't take it on board personally. However, I'm aware of many other people that become, especially within the US marketplace, it's becoming more popular here, but they become reliant on the information shared to them. And again, psychics, are human beings. They are influenced by their own feelings and their own stuff it's happening at the time, and it bleeds through. And that's what, the one thing I want to make sure, and the perfect opportunity when I have a professional psychic, someone who works in that arena, if you were to go to a psychic yourself, how would you authenticate so that, because most of us, we don't know any of it's real until way after the fact. And you can go, yep, that happened, that didn't, that was right. And thank God I didn't do that. Or, wow, that was really amazing. I would never have thought that. I wouldn't have anticipated that. Now, I've seen many of mine for, like Deb, you're aware, I've known her for 20 plus years. Janet, I've known for a decade. Many of them I've got a long-standing relationship with. But it takes a long time for me, unless they get instantaneously so much that I go, wow, I haven't told anybody that. Then I know they're reading at a higher level, and they've got me instantly, so that I can give that credibility. What's your means to authenticate that you can share with listeners?
Sure. Let me just say hi to Deb just for a second, because she actually asked me to. Deb Webb, a great friend of mine. We have dinner together quite often, and Amanda De Warren as well, for that matter. The three of us plus partners all come along. Just to give you guys an indication, I, as a professional psychic, and clearly Rosie in her areas, has a really well-defined BS meter, and that's what we all need to develop, and that's your intuition. So in my view of where that's positioned in your body, and science might go, you're full of it, buddy. But my view over the decades is your intuition comes in somewhere around the right side of your belly, across in a line under your right nipple. And every wound you've ever parked is on the left side of your belly, across from your navel.
Sorry, Paul, I'm having a vision right now of all the people in America in their cars putting their hand under their right boob and running it down. And the people alongside looking, going, what are they doing?
I know. I actually get my clients to do that. I'll go, I need you to breathe deeper, because the thing is, when we're anxious and tense and stressed, we're going to shallow breathe. So by bringing people into the lower abdominal breathing, it changes gears in their mind, in their feelings, in their heart, and it gets them in a place of being more real. And I need them to be real with me when I'm with them in a reading or in a positive change session, because I need to access the courageous little inner self of that person. I need to talk to them, and many people are scared children in adult bodies. I've got no doubt about that. And my goal is to find the wounds in their journey that have hurt them, in the positive change session. This happens that way. So
that's your goal, Paul, but I'm just going back to, because a lot of people, they're not going to see you per se individually. So also talking about, because this is such a prevalent field at the moment, of professional psychics. So I'm bringing it back to generality to assist others.
Okay, back to the BS indicator, and that's what you got to breathe deep and trust with. Hence the request of you guys to breathe deep. As soon as you breathe deep, you can start picking up intuition rather than just what your mind views, because your mind might go, well, that's good. They're going to be able to lift curses. They're going to be able to give me the winning lottery number tickets. I'm in there, and how much do I pay?
Don't forget the man of my dreams. He's apparently at the top.
Absolutely. Tall, dark, and handsome.
Hey, since you're a professional psychic, when's mine in?
I'd better talk to you after hours, Rosie. But in terms of that one, the importance of the individual is just tuning in, because there's so much con out there, and I'm totally with that. I cringe with lots of psychics myself, Rosie, and what they've said, and how dare they, and how do they get away with that stuff. And we're in an industry, if you've got big gold circular earrings and a purple shirt, you're away. So that makes it even more terrifying.
Well, it can be any industry, because having worked as I do presentations globally in many different industries at the moment, and the one thing all of them can't stand is being tarred with the same brush of the odd few that can give a really bad rap and a bad name. But the only reason that I want to really highlight this with this opportunity today is because it is so prevalent in the US, and I was there only recently, and I was doing some filming over there, and I called around to, I was in Sedona, I was in LA, I was in Boston, I was in New York, I was in Vegas. I put the feelers out to lots of people saying, who's the best of the best, who's your go-to person. And I met with a few, and I spoke with a few, and there's only one in Sedona that I found who had led police to a missing person. as a tracker, more or less, but the others were just full of, the proverbial platitudes and generalities. And I thought, you're not reading me at all. If you read me at all, you'd be aware that, I'm well versed in many of these topics. So that's where people will go to a psychic because they're desperately wanting to hear what is a common thing many people are wanting to hear, solutions to their problems or, something optimistic to look forward to. Yeah. So how do you not hear what you want to hear and keep that BS meter on? Yeah,
well, for myself, I know some excellent ones, and when I get cross-reference from referrals from other people, I think that's an important way for people to be looking at, and every psychic and many of the best psychics will be sitting home doing the dishes because they're not in the marketplace. Some might be your auntie. We've just got to give respect to psychic frequency, psychic ability to connect is like the different radio stations on the dial. Not everybody's going to tune into you specifically and never think that they can. So you need to find the ones that you like, love and trust, and not necessarily stick with them forever because that certainly can happen. But be open to hearing that information, maybe writing it down or recording it, and then going back and going, okay, but what do I choose to do now with that information? How do I choose to follow through there? Do I think that bit's relevant for me? I've had people get back to me after years and they'll go, bloody hell, you were right about that guy. I was halfway down the aisle and I got this message and it was like, oh my God. And things like that. It's amazing what information can come through. And I know for myself personally, I'll use statements that only that particular person they were focusing on uses, and I'll go, well, that's interesting. I've never actually said that sentence to anyone before. And it's just tuning into the energy bands around everybody because, we're far from just being conscious physical beings. We have information stored in the energy around us, and that's accessible to people with skill.
Okay, so for people that don't have the skill, just to recap for a recent question, the best way to know if people are for real, that you're going to for a reading, is simply take that breath in, that Paul has mentioned, get yourself centered first, and then that way you can be able to listen to, I guess, that silent speak, that, the little voice inside of yourself, because none of us are disconnected. And I think that's a fallacy that runs around, that we need a third party to access God, to access spirit, to access our better selves, our higher self, whatever language we want, alien, whoever, whatever. We've each got our own antenna, our own dial. We each absorb rays from the sun. We each absorb, molecules of oxygen from, the water, from the air, from everywhere. We're each equally equipped. And that's the one message I want to make sure people do get. So now I always draw a card before I do any program, and from the Abraham Esther Hicks deck. And it's interesting. The card I drew at the last minute today says, my attention to unwanted attracts more unwanted. And I think that's relevant for what we're talking about right now.
Absolutely.
Is that focus that they've got of that drama, that difficulty and that problem that's going on is going to be amplifying it, which is what you would see quite regularly. And that's where you've, I believe, enhanced upon an emotional freedom technique with tapping.
That's exactly right, Rosie. Yes. Close to 20 years ago now, I learnt the standard EFT tapping format that Gary Craig offered to the world, and he just basically opened his manuals and said, here you go, this has helped people from Gulf War syndrome, and see how it can work for you. So I had my shop in Brisbane at the time. I've had 3 shops full-time for the last 17 years, and 10 years in my one in Montville just now, called Optimistic Views, which hopefully people will smile at because I think that's a great name. And,
I do Rosie Outlook.
Beautiful. We're on the same page. But importantly, the information we get in ourselves by the reflections we get back is the important first step for people to be looking at, and that's an important thing in my view. we're all biotransmitters, and I've got two self-help tapping books out there. One of them's called Targeted EFT for Money, and the other one's called From Fat to Fabulous, and both of them are worked around the work I do. So what I did with standard EFT was, in the early days, you'd present a page that might have had 200 different feeling-based words to the person, and I would then be required to ask the person, which means the person's defensive conscious mind in my language, how they're feeling. Now, the person might come in and go, I'm fine. I'm an empath, and I can go, man, they're struggling with violation trauma. They've clearly been bullied. They're lucky to be breathing. They've got all this information I've already pulled out of their reality. And the person's mind will go, well, I'm feeling a bit sad, and I'm feeling a bit, tired, and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, hang on a minute, I'm not going to let this person's mind sabotage this opportunity to help this person evolve. So what I'm
just going to intervene there. So for listeners, so that you're aware, in a sense, we all have our own energetic blueprint or imprint that we leave everywhere we go. So you understand,
Absolutely.
We have fingerprints that leave an oily residue everywhere we go. This is like an electromagnetic energy imprint that is left, that can be picked up and read exactly the same way a fingerprint can be picked up and read, and it is a unique and ever-changing, the same way. One's physical, the other one is more fluid, liquid, moving to, ethereal sort of state, so that we understand. So you're reading that energetic imprint of what they've got stored, far more than the words that they're saying to you.
Totally. So I consider that, if you can imagine a little radio tower stuck to the top of your head, and your specific personal signal, which is a combination of your happiness, every wound you've ever had, your issues you're dealing with at the moment, where your relationships at, where your fears around communication, intimacy and commitment are, where's your bank account at. All of those topics are being radiated out of that little radio tower all the time. So then for me, I can pick up those signals really clearly. So the person might go, I'm fine, but the reality is there's so much more information I was able to tune into, and then use that information to help them reduce the white noise that's creating for them and the sabotage, so that they can feel safer, boost their heart, and then feel a lot better and then respond. So in the process I've developed, it's a therapy-based process, so that I've nowadays got over 200 different statements that a mind can use to suppress and control the person. And in most cases, the listeners and the people that aren't lucky enough to be listening will be impacted on this, can well be impacted on this just about every breathing moment of their day. And so some of it can come from childhood stories that the mind keeps repackaging through the marketing team, or it can be getting scared by a dog. But all of that's coming out of Radio Rosie, Radio Paul, Radio insert name here. And then you'll be getting those reactions and reflections back in your life. So,
utilising that same radio analogy, in many ways, I relate to human beings as being not just radio transmitters, but they're receiving and transmitting, but also transmuting and transforming. And that's sometimes with increased awareness is where I believe that we're able to transform our understanding. And as we transform our understanding and utilize that heart energy that, as you said before, science may not back this up. Science actually does, because the electromagnetic force of the heart is 5,000 times stronger than the electromagnetic force of the brain. So the heart overrules the brain. It has far more force and magnetic attraction and appeal. So love is one of the strongest forces that we as human beings can access and garner and harness and utilize to transform and transmute not just our minds, but then physically our bodies with renewed vitality and radiance and enthusiasm and that life force of energy that we have. So I've seen that time and time again. So the more that a person learns to listen to their heart and communicate directly with their heart and be aware what their heart even has to say, I think is the first step for a lot of people, just making that connection that they authenticate themselves instead of picking up transmissions from another, receiving transmissions from another, because there are many walking around as empaths, because that's all receiving and transmitting is, an ability to read those frequencies, that are confused and think that stuff is theirs.
Yeah, that can certainly happen. I look at it this way, Rosie, which is when I got my therapy hat on. So a person can come in and their transmitter, love's magnetic. So that when you're in that beautiful love space, strangers will give you a rose and all that sort of lovely stuff. But all fear's also magnetic. So yes. What happens in the percentage of the frequency transmission is if a person's running 25% love frequency and 75% fear frequency, then the strongest force is the fear frequency. So their mind, which is always on the lookout for challenge, threat, or safety, will be looking at topics that can have them feeling nervous and then force the person to withdraw or lay low. So what the processing does is to go, listen, mind, that story happened 35 years ago or last week, but in either case, we're in current time now, so we don't need your constant reminder of that old story and hurt to be influencing this decision. So that's where the tapping statements come in. So one of the tapping statements sounds like this: even though I fear that even though I feel impatient, stressed, tired of waiting, frustrated, tense, anxious, and over it, I still deeply love and accept myself. So I've taken the EFT intro point and exit point remaining the similar, and then putting the fear in the middle there. And that's an actual circuit in the mind. So by tapping that through with a person, then it actually reduces the impact of the story. So I do have an issue with standard EFT, TFT, and any of the other versions of it, because they'll frequently get up and go, if you do this, you will clear the topic. Now, I know how sophisticated my mind is, and if anyone else's is like mine, it ain't clearing anything that it can influence and restrict me with. So I say that by using this process, it'll help reduce the amount of stress around the topic. And when that fear reduction or stress reduction reduces, there's room for the heart to take that space. So by the end of a session with me, which can take 2.5 hours, the person has way more heart energy to be in the moment with. Courage lives in the heart, in my perspective. So when the courage is strong, they can back their positive and motivational choices. They can back their new life, and their frequency emanation improves in that moment as well. And so they're much more in the frequency of resonating love, and therefore being in a position to receive love.
I often get asked a question as in, how do I tell what I've got going on? And I say, that's very easy. Look at your reality. Look at what's happening around you.
Absolutely.
And in this modern day of technology, we've got a perfect record. All we've got to look at is our Facebook feed. Look at what you're talking about. Look at what you're sharing. Look at what you're posting. I've got a couple of ex-cops that, now and then their feed comes across mine, and I think, it's a different day, but it's just the same old drama. It is one drama after another. And I swear, if they had it printed out as a book to look at, they would go, oh my God, is this really what I'm sharing day in, day out? Well, people, it's worse than that. It's your life. It's not a book. This is your life, your currency of how you're living it day by day by day. Become more aware and attuned to it. And as you do that, you can be more authentic in those experiences. And that attention to unwanted, you can flip the switch equally and do attention to wanted. And that, again, will diffuse. This is where before, when you mentioned that, sometimes you have to go through the murk. I wrote my first book, Time to Kick Butt, over 15 years ago, that's one way, and a lot of psychotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists love to go back through that murk and mire and relive Groundhog Day again and again and again. Now, brain doesn't know any difference, and it's going to relive it like it was, right now instantly.
Absolutely.
I'm not one for Merck and Meyer. I've been there, done that. I'm not choosing to waste any more of my time and valuable experience and energy in putting it back through that experience. So for me, I keep my focus on what's lighter and brighter and has more force and energy and vitality of what I'm interested in. And that overflow is what's cleaning up whatever was murky, whatever was mired, whatever is in the gunk, because the overflow is purity. It clears it up. So that's my alternative means. No doubt other people have got even more means and modality. So it's finding what works for the individual. So for yourself, what would you say, just in the last few minutes, what's your most extraordinary experience that you've had?
Some of the greatest joy I get from doing this work is, and just going straight off what you're just saying there, people will resonate to a person. So I might have a person coming in going, I need direction for my career. And this happened about 9.5 years ago when I first opened my new shop up here. I had a lady come in. She was a bit messy, a bit teary, and she says, I've just broken up with my partner and I'm not sure what I need to do. So anyway, I invited her to have a reading. She had a reading, then she had a session with me, the positive change session. And then at the end of that, we got to the point there where she said, okay, I feel a lot better now, thank you so much. So she left. Now, that's not an unusual thing for me to hear. The next day, though, I was working on somebody else, and there was a little squished up bit of paper getting pushed under my door. And people can read this testimonial on my website, which the details I'll give soon. But the note said, thank you so much for yesterday. You've helped me restore my heart energy and my self-love and ability to see a new version of life. I'd come to Montville to suicide, and that is the last thing on my mind now. Thank you so much. So one extreme scenario there, but a lot of people, a client friend of mine in the ADF got raped. She was an Australian Army officer, got raped in the ADF, and she basically came in and with a similar story. You gave me my life back. I can live and love and trust again. And that's what I live for, helping people at a core level.
They're powerful moments. So your website, without that big sigh at the end of it, the release, it's probably talking all that drama. We had to let it go. Now, your website that people can find you?
I'm sure. You can either get me through www.targetedeft.com or my actual name, paulboulton.com.au. So Paul,
and that's spelled Boulton, Boulton.
That's indeed right, the French way. So .com.au, and more than happy to help you. You can search me on the internet, put in Psychic Montville or Paul Psychic Montville or anything like that. You'll find me very easily. Looking forward to help whoever I can.
Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate your time. And for our listeners, you've been listening to W4CY Radio. You can always join the live chat and send in your comments and your feedback. I'm still thinking of the Facebook book. Remember to like on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and it's Rosie Pekar, depending on where we're from. So
remember. Thank you so much, Rosie.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I'm just going to close with the end of that card. My attention unwanted attracts more unwanted. So for every pleasing thing, there is an unpleasing counterpart. For within every particle of the universe is that which is wanted, as well as the lack of that which is wanted. When you focus upon an unwanted aspect of something in an effort to push it away from you, it only comes closer, because you get what you give your attention to, whether it is something you want or not. It is up to you to focus upon and attract what is wanted. So until next week, stay tuned on what's wanted. Talk to you then on Until Now. You've been listening to Rosie Pekar, W4CY.